The dim glow of the evening sun filtered through the ancient windows of Rivendell's library, casting long shadows on the rows of forgotten tomes. The air was thick with the weight of centuries of knowledge, and yet there was a strange stillness in the great hall. Aranes, a young elven historian, walked slowly through the aisles, his fingers brushing against the spines of the scrolls, as though hoping to feel the pulse of long-forgotten truths. His heart beat faster as he reached a particular shelf, where a new discovery had been made, a small, weathered scroll sealed in a thin layer of dust. It had been tucked away, hidden among records that had long since been catalogued and forgotten. It was this scroll, this relic of an age lost to time, that had called Aranes to it. His curiosity had always driven him to search the archives for stories that lay just beyond the veil of history. And now it had led him here, to something more than he had expected. As he unsealed the parchment, a musty scent filled the air, and the ancient text revealed itself to him. It was written in the flowing script of the Eldar, but there was something unusual about this one. It wasn't a record of any simple event, no. It spoke of the Blue Wizards, those enigmatic figures who had left for the East, their names lost to time, their deeds shrouded in mystery. The text described the journey of Aladar and Palando, two wizards who had been sent by the Valor to oppose Sauron's growing influence in the East. But there was more. There was mention of a battle, a conflict so terrible it had been hidden from the histories of the West. The words, though fragmented, hinted at a war against an ancient power that had lain dormant for ages, something even older than Morgoth himself. Aranes's fingers trembled as he read, his mind racing to understand the implications of what lay before him. The Blue Wizards, who had vanished without a trace, were not merely lost. They had been part of something much darker. Something had gone terribly wrong in the East, something that had been buried by the very forces that sought to protect Middle-earth from the shadow of Morgoth. And yet, no one had spoken of it. The flickering light from the windows dimmed as the evening drew closer, but Aranes remained rooted to the spot, absorbed by the text. It was as though the parchment itself whispered to him, urging him to seek more, to understand the depths of this forgotten war. But the more he read, the more he realized that this discovery was not just a piece of history, it was a warning. A soft footstep behind him broke his concentration, and Aranes turned to find Elrond standing in the doorway. His ancient eyes, wise with the weight of countless years, fixed on Aranes with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You have found something," Elrond said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of command. "Something that calls to you." Aranes hesitated, folding the scroll with great care and holding it in both hands. "It speaks of the Blue Wizards, Aladar and Palando, and their journey into the East," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it tells of something more, something hidden, war fought against an ancient enemy, a power that even Morgoth may have feared. Elrond's expression darkened, and he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "The blue wizards," he murmured. "Few know their true story, and fewer still understand what they became. Their journey was never meant to be part of the West's history. They were sent to the East to oppose Sauron, but the world did not understand what they faced." Aranis's gaze sharpened. "Then you know something of this war." Elrond's face remained inscrutable. "I know of their mission, yes, but what they encountered there, that is something I cannot speak of lightly. Some truths are buried for a reason, Aranis. The blue wizards were not lost by accident. Their absence was not a simple matter of failure or death. It was something far darker." Aranis felt a chill run down his spine. There was a weight in Elrond's words, something ancient and untold, but the historian in him could not let it go. "The East holds secrets, Elrond, and I believe the answers to the blue wizard's disappearance lie there. I must go." Elrond's eyes darkened further, his voice taking on an edge of caution. "The East is not as it seems. What was hidden there is not for the faint of heart, nor for those who seek power without understanding the cost." But Aranis, driven by his insatiable curiosity, could not turn back. "I must know, Elrond. The histories, our histories, are incomplete. The blue wizards did not simply fail. They were part of something far greater, and I believe the echoes of their war still linger in the East." Elrond looked at him with a deep, weary gaze, as if weighing the wisdom of granting this quest. Finally he sighed, his voice soft but resolute. "Then go, Aranis, but know this, the past is a weight we cannot bear lightly. Some secrets are meant to remain hidden, and those who seek them often find themselves lost in ways they cannot return from." With that, Aranis nodded, a fire igniting in his chest. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but he knew his journey had just begun. The Blue Wizard's War, long forgotten by the world, was calling him, and he could not ignore it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the library in shadow, Aranis turned and walked into the unknown, driven by a thirst for truth that would lead him into the heart of the East, and perhaps into the very heart of Middle-earth's darkest secrets. The next morning, with the scroll carefully stored in his pack, Aranis stood before the gates of Rivendell, ready to embark on his journey. The sounds of the valley echoed in his ears, the rush of the Bruinen River, the chirping of distant birds. But beneath it all, there was a deep silence in his heart, a sense of foreboding. He did not know what awaited him, but the pull of the ancient past was too strong to resist. "May the stars guide you, Aranis," Elrond's voice rang out from behind him, filled with the quiet strength of someone who had seen the ages pass. "Remember, the East is a land of lost histories. Whatever you find there, be prepared for it to change you. Not all wisdom is worth seeking." With those words, Aranis turned, his mind fixed on the road ahead, and the untold history waiting to be uncovered. The journey had taken them far from the well-trodden paths of Middle-earth, deep into the heart of the East, where the ruins of a forgotten kingdom lay buried beneath the weight of time. Aranis and Kalas moved through the desolate landscape, the ground beneath their feet cracked and uneven, a reflection of the fractured history they sought to uncover. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, as though the very earth itself held its breath, waiting for something to awaken. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the magnitude of what lay before them became increasingly clear. Once, this place had been a kingdom of great power, standing firm against the forces of darkness that had swept across Middle-earth. But now, its once-proud walls were nothing more than shattered stone, its halls echoing with the ghosts of a past long forgotten. The wind carried with it the scent of decay, and the distant howling of creatures, unseen, echoed through the broken city. This place, Aranis murmured, his voice tinged with awe. It was once a bastion against Morgoth. And yet, here we find nothing but ruin. Kalas, his shadowy companion, did not speak at first. Instead, his eyes scanned the remnants of the city, as though searching for something beyond the obvious. There is more here than ruin, Aranis, he finally said, his voice low and filled with a sense of foreboding. What was once a fortress of light now holds the echoes of a far darker force. Aranis turned to him, confusion flickering in his gaze. What do you mean? This kingdom was destroyed, yes. But by whom? The blue wizards, Kalas replied, his tone heavy with the weight of an unspoken truth. They were not merely sent here to battle Sauron's forces. No, their mission was far more insidious. They came to deal with something far older than Sauron himself, an enemy that even the valor could not foresee. Aranis felt a chill settle over him as he processed Kalas's words. The blue wizards, long thought to have failed in their mission, had not simply disappeared. They had come to face an enemy that had once been Morgoth's ally, an ancient darkness that had slumbered for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. As they moved further into the ruins, the shadows grew deeper, and the air grew colder. The stones beneath their feet seemed to shift, as if the very foundation of the kingdom was unsettled by their presence. Aranis reached down to brush his hand across one of the ancient carvings etched into the wall. The symbols were faint, but there was no mistaking the power they once held. They were remnants of a time when dragons roamed the earth, bound by dark rituals and controlled by Morgoth's will. Look here, Aranis said, his voice barely a whisper. These markings, they speak of a pact, a bargain made with something beyond the realm of Morgoth. Kalas stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the symbols. Yes, it's as I feared, he murmured. The blue wizards did not simply come to fight. They sought power, a power that was not theirs to control. Aranis felt a shiver run down his spine. You mean to say they unleashed something, Collis interrupted, his voice dark and filled with regret. The first dragons, bound to Morgoth's will, were awakened not by accident, but by design. The blue wizards thought they could control them, harness them for their own purposes. But they were wrong. The dragons were never meant to be controlled. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, as though the very earth was reacting to the revelation. Aranis glanced around, unease rising in his chest. But the blue wizards, they failed. Collis nodded slowly, his expression grim. They did not fail. They were corrupted. They made a pact with the first serpent, a being older than Morgoth himself, a creature of the deep, primal darkness that had once served the valor in the early days of the world. The dragons they unleashed were part of that pact, agents of an ancient evil. As the words sank in, Aranis felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. The history of the Blue Wizards, once a tale of noble sacrifice, was in truth a dark and twisted chronicle of ambition and betrayal. Their mission had not been one of salvation, but of temptation. They had sought power beyond their understanding, and in doing so, had awakened a force that should never have been disturbed. We must go deeper, Collis said, his voice now tinged with urgency. There is more to uncover, Aranis. The dragon's awakening is only the beginning. Aranis nodded, his mind racing with the implications of what they had discovered. He had come seeking the truth of the Blue Wizards, but now he understood that their story was far more complicated and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. As they descended further into the ruins, the air grew colder still. The shadows seemed to pulse with life, and the walls whispered ancient secrets. They reached a large, open chamber at the heart of the kingdom, its once grand arches now broken and crumbling. At the center of the room, an altar stood, its surface etched with more of the strange symbols that had begun to haunt Aranis's dreams. This is where it began, Collis said, his voice low with reverence. This is where the Blue Wizards made their fateful bargain. Aranis stepped forward, drawn to the altar. The darkness in the room seemed to press in on him, suffocating him with the weight of ancient power. He reached out and placed his hand on the stone, feeling a strange warmth pulse beneath his fingers. The air around him thickened, and he felt an oppressive presence grow stronger. The first serpent, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Yes, Collis replied. The first serpent was bound here, trapped in this place by the very pact the Blue Wizards made. But the price of their ambition was too great. The serpent was freed, and the dragons were set loose upon the world. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently, and a deep, resonant growl echoed through the chamber. Aranis staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. The darkness in the room seemed to come alive, swirling and coiling around them. From the depths of the ruins, a great dragon-like shape emerged, its eyes glowing with a fierce, unnatural fire. The dragon's curse, Collis muttered. It has never been broken. Aranese's mind raced. The first serpent, Morgoth's lingering legacy, had been awakened. The dragon's guardians of the ancient darkness were now free to wreak havoc once more. They were no longer just legends. They were real, and they were coming. As the shadows in the chamber grew deeper, the sound of leathery wings filled the air. Aranese knew that the battle for Middle-earth had only just begun. As the final tremor shook the ruins, Aranese and Collis stood together, knowing that their next steps would determine not just the fate of Erebor, but the fate of all Middle-earth. The ancient darkness had risen again, and it was a force too terrible to ignore. Aranese stood at the edge of the cavernous ruin, his eyes scanning the desolate expanse before him. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water falling from the jagged rocks above. The shadows cast by the crumbling stone walls stretched long and unnatural, as if the ruin itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to stir. The journey had brought him here, deep into the east, to this forgotten kingdom, whose name had been lost to time. Beside him, Collis remained motionless, his sharp eyes flicking from one dark corner to another. The eastern sage was always the first to sense the changes in the air, his instincts as sharp as his gaze. He had not spoken much since they had entered the ruins, his presence heavy with secrets unspoken. It feels wrong, Aranese muttered, his voice breaking the silence that had enveloped them. There is something here, something old. Collis's voice was low, but it carried the weight of someone who had walked the edges of ancient power. You are right, Aranese. The air is thick with it. This place, this kingdom, was not just destroyed, it was devoured. Aranese turned to look at him, his brow furrowing in confusion. Devoured? What do you mean? Collis glanced around at the shattered remains of what had once been a mighty fortress. This land was tainted by the first serpent. When the blue wizards came here, they did not just fight Sauron's forces. They came to battle something older, something Morgoth had once bred in the depths of Angband. They unleashed it, thinking they could control it, but they could not. Aranese's heart quickened. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture was more terrifying than he had imagined. The dragons, he whispered. They were not the only ones who came from Morgoth. No, Collis replied grimly. They were but one part of a larger plan. The blue wizards were not sent simply to stop Sauron. They were sent to control what Morgoth had created in the east. They were to confront the first serpent, an ancient creature older than Sauron himself, older than even Morgoth's dark reign. It was Morgoth's last weapon, and it was left to slumber here in these ruins. Aranese could feel the weight of the words pressing down on him, as if the very air around them had grown heavier. And the blue wizards, what happened to them? They fell, Kala said, his voice tinged with a sorrowful understanding. They were consumed by their own ambition, seeking to wield the power of the first serpent for their own ends. They believed they could bend it to their will, but instead they awakened something they could not control. Aranis stepped forward, his eyes searching the shadows, as if expecting the first serpent to emerge from the darkness at any moment. Where is it now? What happened to it? Kalas remained silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. The first serpent is bound, he said, finally, but its bindings are weakening. As the blue wizard's curse grows, so too does the power of the serpent. It stirs in the depths, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Aranis's gaze hardened, and the dragons, they are the serpent's guardians, Kala said, the same dragons that Morgoth used in his war. The serpent gave them purpose. The blue wizards failed to understand this, and in doing so, they unleashed a power that will continue to haunt this land until it is undone. Aranis could feel the weight of their discovery settling on his shoulders. The magnitude of what they had uncovered was overwhelming. They had come seeking answers about the blue wizards, but they had stumbled upon something far greater, a force that threatened to rise again and cast its shadow across Middle-earth once more. The sound of distant thunder rumbled in the air, though the sky above was clear. It was a warning, Aranis realized, a harbinger of the darkness that was awakening beneath the earth. We must find it, Aranis said, his voice firm with resolve. We must find the source of the curse before it can awaken fully. Kalas's expression remained unreadable. And what will you do, Aranis, once you find it? What will you do with the first serpent? Aranis hesitated, the weight of the question sinking in. He had always believed that knowledge was the key to understanding the world's darkest corners. But now he faced the reality that some knowledge carried with it a terrible cost. I do not know, he admitted quietly, but I will not let the mistake of the blue wizards repeat itself. This curse must be undone, no matter the cost. Kalas nodded slowly, as though the decision had been made long before they had arrived. Very well, but beware, Aranis. The serpent does not give up its secrets willingly, and it will not go down without a fight. They continued their journey deeper into the ruins, the shadows growing longer and more oppressive with each step. Aranis could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they descended into the heart of the ruin, they found what they had been searching for, a cavern, its walls lined with ancient carvings that depicted the serpent's rise and fall. At the center of the cavern lay a stone altar, upon which a single, cracked egg rested. Aranis approached the egg slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around him seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, as though the egg itself was alive, waiting for something or someone to give it the final push. He reached out a trembling hand and placed it on the egg's surface. The warmth that radiated from it was unnatural, and Aranis's mind filled with images of dragons, fiery, terrible beasts, whose power had been twisted by Morgoth's will. "This is it," Aranis whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and dread. "The curse of the blue wizards." But even as he spoke, the egg began to crack, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. The first serpent was awakening, and with it, the dragons would rise once more. Aranis stepped back, his heart racing. The very ground beneath his feet trembled, and the air grew thick with the scent of fire and smoke. Collis stood beside him, his face grim, but there was no fear in his eyes. "The time has come," Collis said softly, as the echoes of the serpent's awakening filled the cavern. "Now we must face what was once hidden." Aranis took a deep breath, steadying himself. The ancient curse had been unleashed, and now it was up to him to stop it before the first serpent could rise fully and bring ruin to all of Middle-earth. The weight of his quest had never been more apparent, and with it, the realization that the fate of the world rested on his shoulders. With the first crack of the egg, Aranis knew that this was just the beginning. The darkness of the past had risen, and now he would have to fight not only to uncover the truth, but to save Middle-earth from the dragon's curse.